So, welcome, guys, and thanks for joining me for another episode of the Alphabet Podcast. For those of you that don't know, I'm a therapist based in Brixton, but I'm also an autistic woman with ADHD. And in this country, I'm one of upwards of 13 million people. So that represents about 15 to 20% of the population. So that's upwards of 13 million people that are neurodivergent in some way. There's around about 700,000 people with ASD or autism spectrum disorder, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about today. Over 2 million people with dyslexia, and also things like dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, and something else that I'll be talking about today in its adult form, ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, ASD diagnoses, so that's the autism spectrum disorder, have increased 787% in the last 2 decades. So 787%. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that's a hell of a lot. Prescriptions for ADHD medication in the same time have gone up 800%. And there's currently a waiting list for medication for ADHD. So that's whether you're a child or an adult. There is a national shortage of ADHD medication, which is causing quite a big crisis. NHS waiting lists in some places are up to 8 years long, and even private referrals can take up to 2 years. Now, when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about gender, sexuality, race, we're talking about all the different things, but true diversity involves people that think differently. And I think a lot of you may have neurodiverse friends and family and understand the richness that they kind of bring to society and the workforce, which is something else we're going to be talking about today. But just in case you're not aware, neurodivergent people tend to be good at solving problems in creative ways. And I know for myself, because I often learn differently, it causes my brain to think differently, and I have to be more creative with the strategies that I use. So designing technical tasks and planning logistics. So neurodivergent people tend to be good at those things. A strong ability to recall information, details, and knowledge, especially if you're high functioning or autistic and have that excellent memory, but loads of other neurodiversity. But this is the real important one. A higher than average reliability and perseverance, and that is gained from a lifetime of having to face challenges and do things differently. So we kind of know what they add, but there is a problem. There is a problem, and the problem is at the moment is that up to 45%, and this is figures by the National Autistic Society, up to 45% of neurodivergent people have either left or lost their job due to issues around being misunderstood. So that's a lot of people. And currently only 1 in 16 autistic adults are currently in full-time employment. So that tells me that that is coming out somewhere. The average age for an ADHD diagnosis for a male or a boy is 7 years old, whereas the average age for a woman being diagnosed is late 30s to early 40s. So there's a big problem there, and I'm suggesting that women are making up a big part of the figures. So before we go into the issues that are in the workforce, because I would like to, because this will be a tale of two podcasts. On the second half of the podcast, I have a very valuable guest that's going to add insight not only into adult ADHD, but how to have conversations with your employers, because we have to do something about so many neurodivergent people leaving the workforce. So I don't know whether it's a question of people not advocating for themselves or whether employers are being difficult, but we're going to have conversations around that because, neurodivergent people deserve to be employed and have all of the, things that able people take for granted. So now, what is ASD? So autism spectrum disorders, autism, you may have heard it called that, are a series of related developmental disorders that can affect language skills, behavior, socializing, and the ability to learn. So guys, it is a disability. You do have high functioning autism where, these people meet and sometimes exceed their milestones, but essentially it will affect your learning. It will affect your language skills, and it will definitely affect the way you socialize and communicate with others. Now, you're born autistic, and it does totally affect the way you see the world. Some of the risk factors are, sibling that maybe has ASD, older parents, low birth weight, and certain genetic conditions such as Down syndrome and Rett syndrome make it more likely. But, there's no one thing that they've managed to pin it down to, but you're born autistic and it's to do with the way you think and the way you learn. Um, just quickly, because I'm not really focusing on children today, but just in case, because it's a little bit harder to diagnose than your ADHD, I will kind of mention, so autistic children, you would expect them to have difficulty expressing emotions and thoughts, right? So they won't use a lot of gestures to communicate, so their face might be quite blank. They may struggle with eye contact, fixate on one topic of conversation, play differently. This is important. So they may line up their toys all in a row. And if you was to move one of their toys, they would get extremely distressed, like when the orders change. Or they play with their toys exactly the same way. Um, they may also focus on just parts of the object. So if it's a train or a truck, they may just focus on the wheels. And this is important later because I think in autistic people and autistic women, sometimes what causes the communication difficulties is they're focusing on one part of the communication and overlooking the bigger picture. So that is important. Autistic children sometimes may flap hands, rock their body, or spin themselves in a circle. You may have seen that. But this is an important one. Autistic children find it very hard to pretend to be someone else. So by the age of 4, they won't be doing like the usual role play games that children play. As an autistic woman, I can tell you, as an adult, and I can ask my partners, I still don't do the role play things very well. You definitely have to start it. I might can catch up. But yeah, they may also have unusual reactions to the way things sound, smell, taste, look, or feel. And this may be important later because that can look a lot like an eating disorder, but autistic people tend to have a lot of sensory issues. Some people don't like to be touched. Some people don't like certain sounds. Some people don't like certain textures. Um, but because we're really focusing on women, I'm going to take a closer look at autistic women. So with women, you have to kind of expect and accept that the way that they're socialized is different. So, they're not necessarily going to display the same behavior as a male would. So in terms of social difficulties, which most autistic people face, because they do have trouble reading cues. So they'll have trouble reading a room. Maybe if it's one-on-one, it's not so bad. But a whole group of people, there may be issues. It tends to give them anxiety before and after. So they may do better in one-on-one groups. So that's a reason why you may not necessarily notice or think of yourself as autistic because, you think, okay, I do have friends, I do socialize, but is it one-on-one or is it in groups? Now, a struggle to make eye contact. This is a crossover symptom with ADHD. We'll get into it a bit later. But, autistic people tend to find it hard to make eye contact. I know I got in trouble for it a lot as a child. But now I can force myself to make eye contact or seem like I'm making eye contact. I'm actually looking right in the middle of your head, but it's still very difficult and uncomfortable. And because of that reason, a lot of autistic women in particular will be accused of flirting. I spoke about this with my ex one time, who's also autistic, and it's like people misread your eye contact all the time because you're very uncomfortable with it. You're thinking all the time, am I staring too much? Am I not looking enough? And people often mistake that for flirting, which I find absolutely hilarious because I don't know how to flirt and I barely like people. So I've been accused of flirting when I'm not even trying to do anything of the kind. Sensory sensitivity. So like I said, maybe a heightened sense of smell. Thankfully, I don't have this problem because I have no sense of smell, but light, sound, or touch. Now, that could be an ADHD thing as well, because I do have both, but the sounds, like if I'm in a house and I can hear someone else's TV, it runs sound interference in my head. There's certain sounds I cannot tolerate. Yeah, and it's just too much for me, and I may become overloaded. Certain banging sounds are too much for me. And yeah, you will find a lot of common food dislikes and phobias. So once again, it may explain later why it looks a little bit like a eating disorder. Um, Women with ASD or autism spectrum disorder may find it hard to stay organized, a bit similar to how women with ADHD are, but not to the same degree, especially if the task is not interesting. So it's really to do with, whether they find it interesting. So they do have certain issues with their working memory and self-control, and they definitely have trouble adapting to thinking. So autistic women, autistic people can be quite rigid. They'll think something, they will see things a certain way, and it's very hard to shift them from that. And remember, sometimes they're looking at the wheels. So you could be arguing with them and they're focusing on one thing that potentially you did, but overlooking the whole big picture or the whole relationship or other people's feelings, because that's also something that autistic children, adults struggle with, is to understand and communicate other people's feelings. They find it very hard. Um, but interestingly, um, it is the challenges at work that keep coming up. A lot of women with ASD find challenges at work and will tend to have meltdowns, which may involve crying, temper, and obviously in a work environment, that's going to be extremely difficult to kind of put up with. But they will also have intense interests. So autistic people tend to have intense interests anyway. It's the same with autistic women. They're not different in that sense. It's just that their intense interests may be more socially acceptable. So women with ASD do obsess over things. They need to know every fact and focus on every detail. They may have a broader range of interests than males who may just focus on one or two things, but women can have different interests. So for me, this podcast, the fact that it's an alphabet, that's very autistic. But the fact that I watch Game of Thrones like 50 times and I tend to watch things that I've seen over and over again, and I only do things that I want to do. If I don't want to do it, I won't do it. So I've got that demand avoidance as well. So you'll find with autistic people that they'll have very intense interests, but you might find it hard to get them into what you're interested in. It just probably not likely to happen. Um, Repetitive behaviors. So it could be listening to the same song over again. But autistic people can adopt repetitive behaviors. You may have seen it with children, the stimming or self-stimulated behavior that they do to kind of soothe themselves. But women's behavior may be more refined, so they're not necessarily going to clap and rock, but they may twirl hair or do what I do. I tend to pick my ear. I've been told recently that I pick my ear in my sleep, which is quite disturbing. But women too tend to do more socially acceptable things, so they don't want to be not stand out. And women are also more likely to apologize when they're in a social context and they make mistakes or they make faux pas. They're more likely to just say, I'm sorry, it's all me, and move on. So it tends to get missed. But with autistic women or with women with ADHD, I would expect to see a lot of anxiety being a big one, some low mood, definitely, issues with relationships. But remember, it's going to affect the way that you learn. But just to run through so we can kind of combine ASD in children and adults, because these are some of the other things that are not, I wouldn't necessarily see all of them, but I would expect some of them in your backstory. So things like delayed language skills. Now, if you've had, it might be time to ask your parents or, the elder people in your family, did I ever have speech therapy? Because I know I had speech therapy. I didn't meet my speech milestones, and it's because I had a very bad lisp. So the first thing I'll say is a lisp, which technically is only a minor articulation error, often gets overlooked when kids are selected for speech therapy. That could be a sign of high functioning autism. How many of you have a lisp? How many of you have had speech therapy in your past? That is very indicative of ASD. Delayed movement skills. So, that could be dyspraxia. Delayed cognitive skills. Initially I didn't meet a lot of my milestones. I was a premature baby born nearly 3 months early, weighing £3.2. I didn't meet a lot of my milestones, but I did catch up by the time I went to primary school, and by the time I went to secondary school, I'd gone past my peers. So it can be high functioning, but I will say they always did affect the way I learn. Hyperactivity, impulse, or inattentive behavior is also associated with ASD. So the two tend to go together very well. And I'll speak about that a bit later. So, sometimes if you've got ADHD, it might be worth getting tested for ASD because the two things do sit down very well together. Although I will say that ADHD is a lot louder. So in my case, you may see the fidgeting, you may see that I interrupt people, you may see, the ADHD a lot more than you see the ASD. So sometimes it might take the treatment for the ADHD to kick in before you actually realize that you have other symptoms of another condition. But yeah, so epilepsy or seizure disorder can also cause it. You would expect to have unusual eating or sleeping habits, ASD women, gastrointestinal issues, constipation, acid reflux, things like that, unusual mood reactions, definitely anxiety, um, stress or excessive worry. And this is an important one, either a lack of fear, so no fear at all, or too much fear. But I definitely think in Black women in particular, the way that how anxiety presents is different. So they might have a particular way of doing things, be very irritable. But if that's always been how you are, even like, as a child, as a teenager, and you find that you isolate yourself from people, neurodiversity could be a real shout. Okay. So some of these things. Another funny thing with autistic people, or some autistic people, because there's no two autistic people that are the same, but sometimes sarcasm goes a bit over. So for me, yeah, sometimes I get sarcasm, it's hit and miss. Sometimes I get jokes, sometimes I don't. I'm often the last person to get something, which is fine by me. I'll laugh at myself. It's absolutely fine. But now I'm going to move on to ADHD. So, when we looked at ASD, so we've like, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects the way you think and learn. Now we're on to ADHD. There's loads and loads of symptoms, but I'm always trying to make this as easy as possible. All right. So ADHD even is a common neurodevelopmental mental condition that affects your brain. So that's the first instance. It's not try harder. It affects your brain. Your brain will look different under a scan. All right. And it affects how well you concentrate, stay still, and your ability to learn. Because if you are not listening and you are not keeping still, it's very likely that you're going to find learning more difficult. It affects executive functioning, which is, important for your working memory, for regulating your emotions, and for your flexible thinking, which is why people that are in panic mode in ADHD can't seem to even make a basic choice. The working memory is not working well, and the flexible thinking is not too good. Now, with ADHD, there's three types. The first type is inattentive, and this tends to be the one that females are diagnosed with a lot more than males. It used to be called ADD, attention deficit disorder, but that term is gone. We don't call it that anymore. But with all ADHDs, the risk factors again are a sibling or a parent that potentially has it, premature or low birth weight again, so I have that there. Your parents smoking is another one, but also brain injury with ADHD, because that tends to develop. You will have all the genetic factors, but it develops. But for you to get diagnosed even as an adult, the symptoms will need to have been present before 12 years old. All right. So the inattentive one used to be called ADD, and it's more common in females, and it looks a lot like daydreaming. So you might be getting called out for careless mistakes repeatedly at work, inability to multitask, because this is what it looks like in women, missing deadlines, procrastinating and rushing to do things last minute. So whether that be studying or at work, spacing out in meetings, conversations, and totally missing what people are saying, difficulty keeping organized or tidy at school, home, or work. I've added a few. Paying bills and budgeting almost seems impossible. Constantly burning food. Frequently misplacing or losing things, your phone, your pen. I'm going to add passwords to that. That is one of the reasons I knew there was something wrong. I couldn't even remember a password that I set 5 minutes ago, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And this was happening on a daily basis. So if I'd have continued working in the betting shop, I probably would never have realized I had ADHD. But it's because I went to study and I'm trying to do other things that I now realize that something is not working. So frequently missing appointments or forgetting to return phone calls. That's a big one. I forget whole people. It's something called object permanence. We learn that as children, that even though we can't see people, they still exist. A lot of people with ADHD forget whole people. Sometimes I get a message from a friend I haven't heard in a while, and that reminds me that they exist. And it's not because I don't love them. I just don't have that ability to remember people when they're not in my presence. So yeah, that is difficult. Trouble making decisions or building manageable strategies. So just fall into shit when things are going wrong. Most people can have a plan and figure out to get themselves out of it. You're just lost to the world. So the hyperactive things, remember there's three types. So we've done the inattentive. Now we're going to do the hyperactive, less common in women. All right. But this will involve restlessness and fidgeting, jumping from one task to another, so you haven't finished that, but you're going to do that. Talking excessively, which may get go unnoticed in women because it's more socially acceptable for women to talk. That is something that, men have thrown at us for years. We talk too much. So that can be a difficult one, but there's talking and there's talking excessively. And as a child, I never stopped talking. Since I had the speech therapy and it worked, my mum will tell you there was not a day I stopped talking since. So that is a very important symptom, talking excessively, interrupting frequently or talking over people. And it's not like you're trying to be rude, but your brain and all your thoughts are going so fast and these people are going so slow that it's inevitable that that will happen. Difficulty sitting still or relaxing with others. Now, that may look a lot more like fidgeting in your seat rather than getting up, because it does look different in women, but you will have difficulty relaxing. The time when you're relaxing, you're thinking about the thousand things that you still haven't done because you've been procrastinating for months. Yeah, it's very, very hard for an ADHD person to just relax, especially in the company of others. So like I said, there'll be trouble maintaining friendships and relationships. Friendships because you will forget about people, relationships because, whatever's going on in your life, if you've got tasks to do, you've got work to do, you've got relationship stuff, it's always going to be the fastest car that gets through with ADHD. So if all of your thoughts, feelings, things you had to do were all lining up at the intersection in your brain, it's the fastest car that gets through. And the fastest car tends to be the thing that you're going through at the moment. So it could be that your partner's called you up and pissed you off. So now all of the other cars, you might as well switch the engine off. The only thing you're going to be able to focus on, in fact, is that your partner pissed you off. So it's difficult. And there's a lot of ignorance. So people are often telling you to try harder. Trying harder is unlikely to help with ADHD. In fact, it's probably going to make things worse because there are some areas of the brain that are more active and there are some areas of the brain that are less active, which is what the medication aims to try to balance out. But people that say I'm just a bit ADHD, maybe you're a bit disorganized, darling, or maybe you can't. But ADHD is a lot different to that, and it's quite insulting to people that struggle with ADHD. For people without ADHD that are just a little bit forgetful in a normal way to say, oh, because it belittles them and it invalidates their experience, which you should never be doing with people. I've had whole partners and friends and family members that have invalidated my experience with ADHD, and I'm saying, thank God you've never suffered with this. You could not deal with the things that I've dealt with in terms of trauma, in terms of grief. So don't tell me that I'm not strong. I have something that, and I'm asking for help. And this is the thing that I don't understand. When people are asking for help, people are still judging them. Who are you to judge? Who are you to judge? Please. Yeah. So yeah, ADHD is a big one. And the third type is combined. Sorry, before I actually forget to say it. But the third type is combined. So you have the inattentive, which I went through, the hyperactive, and then you have combined, which is symptoms of both. And that's what me, myself, have been diagnosed with. So actually, I'm actually breaking the mold again because it's something that, males are normally the ones that get that diagnosis with the hyperactive. But here we are. But what is the real issue? So we now know the basics of what ASD and what ADHD are. But what's the real problem? So 45% of neurodivergent people leaving the workforce. How is that possible? And why is that? Is it because people are not advocating for themselves? They don't have the necessarily knowledge to advocate for themselves? Or is there a potential that employers are breaking the law and people are coming to them with their struggles and they're being told that they need diagnoses, which, as we know, can take up to 8 years? Now, with the Equality Act, neurodiversity is a disability. So if you're having issues and you can see that any of these things that I've described is what you're struggling with, you have the right to ask for reasonable adjustments at work. And my guest that will come on later will talk a bit more about that. But why are people not advocating for themselves? And I think that there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame. But, I want to talk about women. So men, boys, they're diagnosed average age 7. Women, average age of diagnosis, not until their late 30s or early 40s. I mean, I was 43 when I was diagnosed. It's already kind of ruined my life in parts without me even being aware. But 7 years old compared to 43, So you've had all this 7-year-old has had all this time to, receive the medication, get all of the help, and go on to live, quite a normal life, because you can, develop coping strategies to cope with ADHD. But the longer you've had this knowledge, I think the more it will help. But why? What is the reasons why? And I think, once again, it's the whole idea that women are hysterical. It's misunderstood, you know. But we'll start with the misunderstood. Like I've said, a lot of the characteristics that people think of when they think of ADHD in particular, are what they think of about little boys bouncing off the walls, you know, and they think of autistic people just being by themselves and not wanting to make friends, whereas autistic girls can be quite shy but still make friends, you know. A girl can be hyperactive without leaving her chair. So, it's some of the diagnostic tools, that they use to diagnose this. It's definitely sexist. There is a gender bias. When they were going through the assessment with me, they were asking me questions and I'm having to reframe those questions and be like, well, actually, no, I didn't get up out of my chair much because I'm aware that I'm not supposed to get up out of my chair. So they're asking questions like, whereas a boy would just jump out of his chair, I'm a girl and children are supposed to be seen and not heard. And I'm not going to jump out of my chair, but it doesn't mean like I don't feel like I want to. So there is a bit of a gender bias, just like there is in society. Everything is designed by men for men. So that needs to get looked at, because I think that it's gonna get missed. But the big one is misdiagnosis. So women are hysterical. If they don't like their food, or they're very anxious, it's because they're hysterical. It can't possibly be because they're neurodivergent. So a lot of women, and I'm talking thousands, many are diagnosed with mental health conditions before they're diagnosed with neurodivergence. Now, a lot of neurodivergence comes with secondary mental health conditions. So people with ADHD, ASD, dyslexia, a lot of them may have low mood. And especially with ASD, you're going to have a lot of anxiety. Okay? But they're secondary. Bipolar gets diagnosed a lot with women that are neurodiverse in the first instance, depression and anxiety, and interestingly, eating disorders. So I've spoken about the sensitivities and, the food phobias that you have as part of being autistic. Women are straight away being labeled with an eating disorder and it's being missed, being labeled bipolar. Yeah, bipolar instead of ADHD. Now, the problem is, if you are bipolar and you are suffering from anxiety and you're being given medication for these treatments, unless you're being treated for the ADHD, which is the main thing, the treatments for the other conditions are unlikely to work. So you've got a whole leap, thousands of women that are being mistreated because they've been misdiagnosed. So they're wondering why they're not getting any better. Seek a second opinion. Martha's Law. Get a second opinion. As a kid, I was forced to eat things. Oh, you're just being fussy. Oh, you're just sensitive. It's another thing that gets thrown at neurodivergent children and women. No, I'm not just sensitive. It's a bit more than that. But yeah, any treatment is unlikely to work until you're treated for the primary condition. But this is the big one. It's being missed altogether. And I've mentioned it in some of my social media things, but it's the masking. So you're avoiding drawing attention to yourself. You're covering up your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior sometimes. And women are more able to follow social cues via observation. That's a fact. We do it all the time. We have a look, we assess, we jump in. We're more apologetic if we make errors. But what about the amount of women in the justice system that are maybe co-defendants for men that are suffering from neurodiversity? So it has some real big impacts there. So that's something else that I would love to be able to talk about, but we only have a certain amount of time. But that's a big thing. How many women are currently sitting down in prison as victims because they're a co-defendant in a male with a male? Maybe they've been told to hold something. How many of them are autistic? Right. So signs of, and we spoke about the signs of high functioning ASD in women, but I do want to emphasize difficulty with transitions as well. So changes in routine are likely to cause a neurodivergent person suffering from something like ASD or ADHD a lot of distress. But I want to talk about Black women as well, because I think Black people in particular, we've had a hard time. We've just about got ourselves around mental health, all the trauma that we faced generationally. And now it's like, it seems like there's this other thing that now they're trying to add on to us. And, as black women in particular, we're strong black women. I mean, what I mean, what do you mean I got something wrong with my brain that's going to stop? I need to get this done. I need to do that. I need to do this. Don't let these old-fashioned, outdated stereotypes, the way you've been brought up, stop you from getting the help that you need. I ask for help. Raggo, I don't business. Therapist or no therapist, my life was falling apart. Okay? I don't want to be called strong if it means that I cannot ask for help. I need help. I'm not strong right now. You get me? I was strong when I was dealing with my trauma and my sexual abuse and my grief. I don't want to be strong for this. I don't want to be strong for this. It's ruining my life. So I also think there's a lot of assertive ignorance, and that's what it looks like in black women. Wrong and strongism. I think, they're quite aware that there's something wrong, but they don't want to be labeled. It's bad enough being labeled with a mental illness. Now you're going to tell me that I've got neurodiversity. No. I'm not having that. But if you have children that have this, the chances are they've gotten it from you. So face facts. The sooner you get help, the sooner you can see things in your life in a different way. Because it's likely that you would have had difficulties in relationships. You want things done a certain way. You can't emotionally connect. And you're not fully understanding why you're not getting the full experience. So, as an autistic woman with ADHD or ADHD as they're calling it now, the mixture, I thought getting a diagnosis wouldn't really impact my life a lot. But I didn't realize how much that wasn't true. It's not like I knew I had ADHD my whole life. When I look back now, I can see that I was always talkative and I was being taken out of class to learn. And, I was a bright child. So I think when you're bright, sometimes it gets overlooked as well, because people expect that if you're autistic or if you have ADHD, that you'll also have some type of learning difficulties. And I did have difficulty learning, but because of that, I taught myself. So imagine the kind of sense it takes to do that. I can't learn the way you're teaching me. I'll learn a different way. And I will help other people that learn a different way to learn too. But there's definitely some learning difficulties. But school, primary school, secondary school, even down to A levels, I was fine. But the shit hit the fan for me when it got to university. The structure's all over the place. They've got lectures where this person is talking for ages and ages and ages. I don't even think I listened at all. But my whole life fell apart, and I couldn't understand because I was so smart. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't keep up with this. I mean, I got my degree, but it was awful. And I said I'd never, ever study again. And I didn't until about 5 years ago when I went back to college to train to be a therapist. Sorry, this mic keeps cutting. When I went back 5 years ago to train to be a therapist, now that the same issues came back up. The people in my group were like, but you've got ADHD, Lee. How have you coped with it? And I'm like, who's got ADHD? ADHD what? Mind your business. Who's got ADHD? And obviously the exercises that you have to do, I realized that I was interrupting people. It's not so bad when I have my sessions because I can hyper focus. So you do have special qualities as a neurodivergent person. But I'm like, what do you mean? So it's not like I've always known I've had this thing. I waited 3 years for the diagnosis, and I was telling everyone the diagnosis ain't going to change me. But I didn't realize how much it goes into your past and how much sorrow it gives you, because there's still certain things in my life that I've not achieved. And I find it so hard. And I find it hard when people that I love just say to me, try harder, or, when I have a meltdown, judging me. Like, I wouldn't do the same if it was you. I don't judge people like that. I needed help and people couldn't see that. And the diagnosis is like, okay, you have this label. Well, what does this label actually mean? And I've only went through the process of diagnosis so that I can raise awareness. I think by the time I went to the doctor to tell them that I thought I had ADHD, I was pretty certain I already had it. But, as women, we don't get diagnosed, and as black women, we certainly don't. So I'm happy to throw myself in front of the bus as someone that you can see that is out there, and they're doing this. Get the help that you need. I'm representative of all my intersections. I'm a black woman who's gay and disabled, but my disability is invisible. And because of my intelligence, it often gets overlooked, and I don't think that's fair. I really struggle with things. But, with this podcast, I always want to try to do something to help, because, I've been trying to put this podcast together for a couple of weeks and my brain's just not been complying with me. So I had to go back to some of the techniques that I've learned in order to get things done. And I thought, okay, I'm going to throw this out on the podcast. So, what can we do if we find it hard, we find it really hard to get stuff started? Because with ADHD, for me, that's the real thing that bothers me the most. It's just getting going and getting started with things. So this lovely Italian man, I'm not going to butcher the language too much, but this technique is called the Pomodoro technique. And Pomodoro is just Italian for tomato, and it's named after the tomato-shaped timer that was used in this first experiment. So it's a time management technique, but it will help you with procrastination and getting started with things. So you might want to get a pen quickly. So I'll let you run off and go and get a pen. Got the pen, got the paper. Right. So step number one. So number one, decide on a task, whatever that task may be. If you're studying, it might be revision, it might be something around the house, but decide on that task. So step one, decide on the task. Now, step two, set the Pomodoro timer. It doesn't have to be tomato shaped, guys, but set the timer. And, the traditional Pomodoros say 25 minutes. If 25 minutes sounds like a long time, you can start with 15, no problem. I do 15. So set your Pomodoro timer for 25 minutes or 15 minutes, what you prefer. And step number three, then you start work on that task, right? So step three, work on that task. Whatever it is, work on that task, time is going. Step four, end work on that task when the timer sounds. And this is important, take a short break of 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so that's step four, end the work, take a short break, 5 to 10 minutes. Step five, now go back to step two, which is to set the timer. So you want to do this again. And you need to repeat this until you've completed 4 Pomodoros. All right, so that's why I quite like 15 minutes. I like evenness. So if I do 4 times 15 minutes, that's an hour, right? So step 6 now, after 4 Pomodoros are done, take a long break of 20 to 30 minutes, and then return to step 2 again. So decide on task, step 1, 2, set the timer, 3, work on task, 4, end and have a break, 5, go back to step 2. So you can see what you're doing. So you're breaking down a task into small pieces. You're not forcing yourself to sit down. And when you get up in them 5 minutes, get up, spin, do the moonwalk, wind your skin, do what it is you need to do in those 5 minutes. Scream, run around the block, do what it is that you need to do to, feel like you can sit back down again. But, also I want to try to give people as much information as possible. The guest that I have on for the second part will probably give you more information on the work stuff, but how to get a diagnosis. So now if you've listened to all of this and you're thinking, this could be me or someone close to me. Now, the first thing I will say about getting a diagnosis is if you're considering going private, seriously reconsider, because the waiting list may be shorter, but unless your GP signs a shared care agreement, that diagnosis may not get you anywhere. So that diagnosis will not be recognised and the NHS will not approve your treatment. So you will not get any medication that you need or anything. The GP will not help you. And it's very rare that they will sign a shared care agreement. So your best bet, unfortunately, is to go through the NHS. So if you can get a shared care agreement, great. But we already know that in some places the waiting list is 8 years long. So because ADHD and ASD look so similar, don't make the same mistake I did. When I went to my GP, who asked me a few questions before referring me, I didn't mention ASD. So I got sent for an ADHD assessment. Through the course of that, it's come up from my mum's answers, from what I've put, that it's, you are autistic, but you haven't put that pathway down. So because I realized before the end of my ADHD assessment, and I mentioned it, I've been fast-tracked. So I may have to wait a few months, maybe maximum of a year for, my diagnosis for ASD. But if I'd have said it at the time, I would have both my diagnoses. So when you go to your GP in the first instance, tell them you want assessment for ADHD and ASD, because it will save you time in the long run. It will save you loads of form filling. And you also have the right to choose. So, because there is this long waiting list now, they're, getting private companies, certain people, they are allowing you to choose a different. But like I said again, if you're choosing a different provider, just make sure that the shared care agreement, just say it to them. They all know what that is. Is my medication going to be affected? But a lot of you can maybe go to a different borough if it's quicker. But the one thing I want to end this podcast on, for me, is something that gets thrown at me all the time, and I think till recently, the question is neurodivergence a superpower? Is it a superpower? And it's something that I've always said, and I think it makes me feel better. It takes away some of the shame, but it also has challenges. You know, I'm 43 years old. When I'm acting like a 2-year-old and having a meltdown, which looks like a 2-year-old tantrum with more explicit language, I don't feel like it's a superpower. When I'm falling to pieces because I can't fill out a form or I've got too many phone calls to make, it doesn't feel like a superpower. You know, when I'm sitting down and coming up with great ideas and able to remember things that people have long forgot, it feels a bit like a superpower. But life is my kryptonite. Doing more than one thing at once is my kryptonite. So is it a superpower? I'm going to use it as a superpower because I'm going to use this diagnosis and put it out there into the world, because I want people that look like me to know that they matter. We've already been strong enough. We don't need, it's not superpower. We're not superhuman. You know, we're ordinary people just trying to get by. You know, like I said, I can deal with complex grief, complex PTSD, things that would make other people melt. They wouldn't be able to cope with my life in that sense. But yet, this condition has brought me to my knees. So, is it a superpower? I don't think it is. I generally don't think it is. But something else that I came across while I was doing some research is ADHD Adult UK. They have a podcast on Spotify, this really popular podcast, but they also have loads of peer-to-peer stuff. And you want to speak to people that are going through it, that understand it, because you may find that you're speaking to your loved ones about, you know, your neurodiversity and how it's affecting you, and they don't really understand. But, you know, we need to get our rights out there. 45% of neurodivergent people losing their jobs or leaving the workforce. Only 1 in 16 autistic people in full-time employment. So I hope that this, I would say it's more than introductory, because I did go into some depth. I mean, there's so much to know about neurodiversity and ADHD and ASD, and I could sit here all day and still not mention everything. But I'm hoping now that if you're someone who's wondered, you know, could I possibly have this or have this, that you're a bit further along now. You may have to listen back to the podcast again because, you know, there's a lot of masking going on with women. And I see women all around that are masking. I see women on the bus that look so uncomfortable, and I think, I wonder if that woman's autistic. You know, I see people do certain things and I think, I wonder if they have ADHD. And it's amazing how many people, you might just have a casual conversation and mention it, and they have no idea. So I know for a fact that there's loads of neurodivergent women around thinking that it's just their personality or it's just what they struggle with. And, you know, a diagnosis is not for everyone. If you find that you can cope with your everyday struggles, then you don't need a diagnosis. But, you know, it may help you. You know, workplaces should be providing reasonable provisions for disability. They really should. Neurodiverse people should not be having to feel uncomfortable going to work. So we need to get better at having these conversations, advocating for ourselves. And, you know, I've been in a low place since I've been diagnosed. I feel disconnected from all my friends. I mean, my partner up and left the building around about the same time. You know, it all happens at once. You know, I'm actually going through one of the worst times in my life, but yet I don't have much support. So I don't feel no way. I will go to the website and look things up. I've got a couple of close friends that will listen to me. Even my family. I've had family members say, yeah, but whatever you've just got to learn to deal with it. And those attitudes are not helpful. And I really think people like that, I can't even be, no, shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. Because you're causing harm that doesn't need to be done. If you think like that, keep it to yourself, because we all struggle with something. And it's the people that are the loudest and the most ignorant. They're usually the ones that have got the least self-awareness, and people have opinions about them, but nobody's judging you. But please shut your mouth, because People are going through things, and the last thing they need is your judgment. So go get yourself a drink, guys. I'll be back in a few minutes. My next guest has also recently had a diagnosis of ADHD in later life, but she's extremely successful. She's worked as a child protection social worker, and she's currently the manager of several managers. I think she manages about 20 or so managers. Don't quote me, but she's the manager of all of these managers. But yet she still struggles, and she's recently received a diagnosis. She sent me a message and said, "Lee, I want to come on and speak about neurodiversity in women." And I said, "Right, Jackie, you're up." So Jacqueline Quince will be up next on the Alphabet podcast, and she really, 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 really will offer some good advice on how to tackle your employers, but to get a different perspective on what it's like to be an adult woman living with ADHD, because you guys have heard my experience, so it might be interesting for you guys to hear a different one. So go get yourselves a drink, and I'll be back on the other side with this special guest, and we'll continue the discussion on neurodiversity. So welcome back, guys. I hope you've had time to go and collect a drink. For those of you that can spot the difference, I've just added a chain. So well done for those of you that's been paying attention. But here, my lovely guest, Jacqueline Quince, who I told you briefly about on the first half of the podcast. So Jacqueline, welcome to the Alphabet podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
No,
I'm a little bit excited about doing this and having a chat.
No. Listen, I've been saying it from the beginning. I want people to come on and share their stories and join the discussion, because, you know, these topics that I pick, it's not just about me, it affects a lot of people. So today I've been talking about neurodiversity, mainly ASD and ADHD, the issues with women and diagnosis. I've spoken about how 45% of neurodivergent people are leaving the workforce, Jackie. So that's something I would like to pick your brain about. You know, what speaking to your employers and getting reasonable adjustments look like, and just how women in particular is going under the radar. Because I know for you've also recently been diagnosed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I have, and I think one of the things I want to sort of share with people, I'm also I've got menopause thrown in, just to like literally keep me on my toes a bit more. In terms of sort of work and that, I'm really keen to share, because I have nothing but positive experiences about work.
Guys, I'm just going to quickly share with you, Jackie at one stage was my manager, and, you know, I can say that at the time I needed reasonable adjustments due to my physical health, and Jackie was very, very, very helpful with that. And, you know, any issues that I had came up way after you went, Jack. So, you know, this is what
I was long gone by then.
Yeah, this is what a good manager looks like. So your experiences will be useful. So just tell us a bit about your diagnosis, Jackie.
Yeah, so it was suggested, ironically, to me by a GP about 15 years ago, when it was totally unheard of. You know, you think ADHD and you think child, you think hyperactive child, because that's what we've been led to believe ADHD is. But actually, my GP 15 years ago said something about on the lines of adult ADHD, and I laughed at him.
What were you kind of experiencing at that time?
So at that time, it was more about, I suppose, my mental health at that time, and just didn't feel right. Things didn't feel right. And I'd gone over a period of time to see him, and I was on, you know, the usual, let's prescribe you antidepressants. Not really, they didn't then really address any sort of root causes and sort, you know. But on my last visit to him, obviously he'd seen me over a matter of time, and he mentioned adult ADHD, and I just thought he was off his head, if I'm honest. You know, I thought he was gassing me up. Because there was nothing about it. It was very unheard of. And completely dismissed it. And then, you know, you go about your life, you go about your business. And You know, I'm known for being, you know, JQ, the quirky girl, or JQ and her isms.
I can concur.
Right. But actually, I am quirky. I have got isms, but they're my superpower.
And
100% they are my superpowers.
superpower. I spent about 2 minutes on the last half thinking that to some degree it is, and I think a lot of people do see it that way. So it has been a superpower in a lot of ways. I know that you're a very intelligent woman. You know you do things in a very
Bless you.
creative. But
That's really.
it must have caused issues, Jack.
Oh, look, when I go back to, you know, when I think back to sort of teenage years, you know, and I've asked my brothers a lot about what was I like, and they'll just say things like, oh, you're a little bastard, you know, you're a little bitch, or, you know, you were just forever naughty. And we put that down to normality. It's not, you know, but actually I found a letter that my brother, one of my eldest brothers in the army, and when I was about 13, he wrote my mum a letter. And I didn't see this letter until she'd passed. And in this letter, he's written, you need to focus on Jacqueline.
Wow.
Something isn't right with my sister, and she needs your help and support.
Wow.
I'm 55 now.
Wow.
And he wrote that letter and I was 13. And, you know, like most parents back then, oh, she's just naughty.
And you got labelled that quite a lot. Did you get labelled that quite a lot?
Absolutely, got excluded from school. You know, I was on report all the time. If I was the class clown.
Yeah.
To put it as a, and in one of my school reports, it says that I'm the class clown. But now, what I know through my previous career and, you know, my experiences, my God, I was a child screaming out for help.
And I think that's the sad part of it, isn't it?
And as a 13-year-old girl, you've got your hormones to deal with, peer pressure, and I mean, I was off the wall, behaviour-wise, and it's behaviour that I've probably still got to this day. But obviously, I'm an adult now, so I can modify my behaviour a bit more. You know, I have to work at it.
And that's the process that I would describe as masking.
I have the biggest mask, or I think I have the biggest mask. And to quote a few colleagues that I've worked with over the years, they always say, this mask you have, Jackie, we would never know there was anything troubling you, bothering you. If you were upset, if you were sad, they would never know.
Mm-hmm. And before,
I'm human.
And before you were doing what you're doing, you were a child protection social worker. So I can imagine that you were managing loads of caseloads. So when I think about the multitasking aspect of ADHD, any issues there?
Yeah. So when I graduated from university, ironically, I did an extra year for child psychology. So I did 4 years. And a lot of that child psychology was around ADHD and problematic children. And, you know, children are always the problem. And then went on to practice. And I had a really successful career and I worked frontline child protection. And to this day, I'll always say I love every kid I worked with, you know, because they were all unique, whatever their issues were, their backgrounds. But it was a struggle at times because how my mind worked, and I could see it in so many of these children.
Yeah.
And I always had this passion for not getting them into the criminal justice system.
Because that is a lot of children with neurodiversity, ADHD, especially young black boys, they get put into criminal justice system.
Yeah, and it's ironic because during that time it was predominantly young black men, young people that were that were labelled with this. Well, they're a problem child.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
And they would then, I'd do everything I could to keep them out of the criminal justice system and out the care system at times.
Yeah.
Because, that in itself has got its own issues. But I could always relate and to their behaviour, to how they presented themselves. I always thought I would always go, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But I alienated myself amongst the other professionals because, they'd want to do a tip chart on them and, oh, well, they haven't done that today. Oh, he's done that. And I'd be like, calm, leave it, allow it.
Yeah. Seriously,
this kid's in trauma.
Yeah. So you saw it a lot as a social worker, diversity. And you're there dealing with it yourself, unbeknownst to you. But
completely.
Still managing those, Jackie.
Oh God, I'm good at spinning plates, but Jesus Christ, and I had probably some of the worst cases in England because of the department I worked in. But just want to go back on one thing you said about sort of children and ADHD. Ritalin. Oh no, let's the amount of children I worked with that were put on this drug. And look, I'm not saying it doesn't work because, but with the right other correct interventions as well, But it was like
itself is very rarely the solution to anything.
Right. But it was like, okay, they've got ADHD, let's put them on a high dose of Ritalin so they're walking around like zombies, dribbling. These young men that are, emerging adults. But yeah, plate spinning.
That's a common thing with people that are trying to manage their ADHD. But how else does it show up for you?
So, what now?
Yeah, now, I suppose retrospectively, because you wouldn't have known at the time. But yeah.
No, so I suppose I had to sort of write down a few little bits because what does my ADHD look like? And one of the biggest ones at the moment, and I have to wear an ear protector in my ear. If I'm in a meeting and I've got lots of people sat whichever side of me, I have to put an earplug in.
Yeah.
Can I just tell you that has changed my world? Just getting a little foam earplug for whichever side are the majority people talking.
Yeah.
And it doesn't...
The smallest little sound will capture your attention. It's almost like it's surround sound for you, right?
Right. Last year, I sat in a meeting in my head office for the company I work for, rocking, going, noise!
Yeah.
But they just thought it was me being that quirky JQ.
Yeah.
But actually, it's hurting me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm probably pushing you closer towards a meltdown.
Like, literally. Forgetfulness. I mean, they say it comes with age, a bit of forgetfulness, I'm proud to say I'm 55 and I've got menopause as well. So there's a little bit of, there's a bit of cross wires in there, but the forgetfulness is horrendous. If I don't make a list or it's not in my diet calendar, it don't happen.
Yeah.
Don't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just, it's like it was never going to happen.
You forget, Jackie. I was saying earlier that sometimes I forget people until they contact me. I actually forget that people exist. What are you for?
Who are you? Listen, I forget people's names. These are people that have been in my life for 20 years. But at work, I forget people's names. But I've found a workaround for that.
Yeah. So, what made you pursue a diagnosis?
Because I I was literally, it was a couple of people at work. I've got an amazing HR business partner. And this was probably about 2 years ago. And she suggested it. And I said, oh, it's funny you say that, because my doctor 15 years ago. And that's what made me pursue it, albeit very long-winded, drawn out process. I mean, I was fortunate. Had I have not got it done, my company I work for were going to pay for it to be done privately.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's about to make sure I'm protected, reasonable adjustments are in place, you know, and that I'm comfortable to do my job.
Yeah. And that's an important point, because what I was saying earlier on in the podcast is that there's a lot of neurodivergent people leaving the workforce. Now, obviously, there might be a question of maybe they're not advocating for themselves, but I'm wondering if some employers are acting illegally and actually maybe forcing people to get a diagnosis when actually you don't actually need a diagnosis to actually go about getting reasonable adjustments.
So I'd had the reasonable adjustments way before diagnosis.
How did you go about that? Because a lot of people will be listening thinking, how do I go about that? How do I speak to my employers about that?
So it really is simple. And that will tell you whether you work for a good employer or not, or you've got a good manager or not, is talk to them, tell them what you struggle with on a daily basis at work.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it to my team, come to me, but come with some solutions.
Yeah.
What would help you?
Yeah.
And they just need to be open and honest and bold. And I'd say be bold about it. It's not an employer's problem. However, we've got some great colleagues. We've got great teams that work for us. We need to start doing right by people.
Yeah.
And there's little tweaks that can be made. And what might seem something very trivial to somebody can actually make the difference between that neurodiverse person having a meltdown or actually their day being really comfortable.
Yeah.
Which in turn increased productivity, increased engagement, happy workforce, win-win.
Yeah, it really is. And that's what makes me wonder if people are actually being brave enough to have these conversations. And I'm wondering if women, a lot like us, who've been diagnosed quite late in life, are actually realizing that they're actually got ADHD and other neurodiverse conditions. Because, people say to me all the time, Lee, you're a therapist. You must know you had ADHD. And it was never that way until about 3 years ago when it was continuously pointed out to me. I had no idea. But now going back, I can see how it was responsible for a lot of the things that I struggled with, and how with just a few adjustments, my life could have been made so much easier. So there is an element of sadness for that. But, how else does your ADHD show up in a bad way? But then tell us a bit more about how you see it as a superpower.
So where it shows up in a bad way, and probably has for a lot of years, is my risky behaviour. And it's always been a bit of a standing joke in the family and friend circle that if anyone's going to take a risk, it will be me. But that's true. Yeah. I've never had particularly any awareness of my personal safety because I think I'm untouchable.
Yeah. And is that impulsive? Is that impulsive?
I don't care who you are, I'll fight you. It's fight or flight.
Yeah. It's the lack of fear, isn't it?
Don't have it. But actually, I do have it.
Yeah.
I fear so much, but I have a bit of a fit of the fuckets and think, no.
It's that impulsiveness, isn't it?
Total impulsive. Classic example, about 6 months ago, it was just after Christmas, a blacked out Rangie cut me up on Tottenham High Road. So Lee, you know me. So what do you think I've done?
Stop the traffic.
Right. Got out my car, banging on his bonnet. He only cut me up. I mean, he didn't hit me. And the guy literally wound down his window, and you could just see the absolute despair in him. What?
Who is this crazy woman knocking on my window?
Right. And all he did was leant down like he was getting something, showed me the top of his gun.
Wow.
And I went, well, that don't scare me.
Wow. It's that lack of fear.
Lack. And I went, but I'll allow you. You're going to think I am some kind of little G or something.
Car in his blacked out car, and you're like, I can't allow you. I'm the same. And I wonder if it is the ADHD, because my mum will tell you that despite my size, I've never had that fear. I don't have that fear of humans. Like I would fight anybody. I put myself in very risky situations. And it's only now I'm looking back, I'm like, you're risking your safety. Like, what are you actually doing?
But linking that back, that risky behaviour back to sort of later teenage years, you know, sort of 16, 17, I would really get myself in risky situations that were, when I reflect now, probably really harmed me.
Yeah.
With men.
With men, yeah. Because I'm sure there will be quite a few ready to step in and to take advantage.
Right. You know, because I just had that lack of awareness. Or is it lack of awareness? I am aware, but I just don't, you know, it's just that.
Yeah, that innate thing that would normally stop someone and make them think about it, you know?
Yeah. It's, you know, and my brother always uses it. So when I worked with you in South London, remember, I always used to get the train to work. So I'd get on the train, I'd get on the tube, and I'd get on the bus. Yeah. But then I'd go out after work for a drink, one drink. Look at that night we went to the pub.
Oh, goodness me.
So I was steaming, right? But I don't care. I don't care about walking across London, getting on the underground, dark, no one around. I don't mind walking through Peckham, Brixton, wherever. You know, any of the ends that you should have more awareness.
Yeah.
I don't care. I'll sit on an empty train carriage.
The same thing happened to me. I got run up on. I forgot to tell the podcast. About 2 months ago, I was going to Tesco's at about 10:30, going through my estate as I do. I live in Brixton, heading towards Loughborough Junction. And I'd seen like these three boys coming towards me, and I'd heard them conferring, but I thought they were talking about someone else. So me minding my business, I've just turned my head and carried on walking, only to hear running behind me, only to realise they'd mistaken me for a young man, because I had my bonnet on. I had my bonnet on and my hoodie, and I suppose I'm really little, so maybe they might have mistook me. But if I hadn't turned round, God knows what would have happened.
Right. And it's, you know, but we laugh about it, and I laugh about it, but actually it's not laughable. It's not funny.
Laughable. I carried on my way to Tesco's. That used to be at home having a cup of tea for shock.
Right. With a couple of extra sugars in it.
Yeah. And it's the same. I think about the armed robbery that I went through, and you know, whereas a usual person would probably react, probably give the person the money, me not having any care for my safety, I'm fighting with an armed robber. I mean, that could have went very wrong, and it's only when I reflected afterwards that the trauma and the PTSD really hit me. So it's that delayed reaction actually of putting myself in a dangerous situation, reacting in a dangerous way, and then only afterwards taking stock and reflection and thinking, you know, I put myself.
Could have been so different.
Yeah.
The outcome could have been so different.
Yeah.
And I always reflect back to incidents, and I have them now still. You know, I'd say probably a couple of times a month, there's always risky behaviour from me.
Mm-hmm.
In one way, shape or form. Somewhere along my month, there'll be some risky behaviour.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like a couple of days later, I'll think, oh, we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, and there's also this thing with ADHD people where they don't necessarily always learn from their mistakes, so they can seem to do the same thing over and over. But
And that's the OCD side of it, isn't it? I think, you know, we talk about compulsive disorder and being compulsive, but I think that risky behavior links in with that.
yeah,
Because I still do risky stuff that I was doing 20 years ago.
yeah,
You know, and I know it's risky, but I think I've got it under control.
yeah,
Complacency,
yeah,
lack of awareness.
yeah. How has ADHD affected your relationships?
So, interestingly enough, so relationships for me have always been a challenge. Every relationship I've had has always been a challenge. And that's purely because I'm probably quite insular
Yeah,
and love the idea of being in a relationship, but don't really like everything else that goes with it. So we can't live together. That is never going to happen. You can't be at my yard more than one night a week, right?
go home, Roger.
Right. And sometimes I'm going to actually wake you up and go, can you just go home now, please?
Yeah.
I never succeed at relationships. Never. And I've got some long-standing, like, brethrens that I was in relationships with, but actually now we're just really good friends. And they all say to me, you're just the hardest person. You don't want for anything. You don't need anything. You're quite blunt with, we're doing this, we're doing that. No, I don't want to see you.
Yeah, and that can be.
And every one of them has said that I come across quite cold.
Yeah.
Quite callous.
Yeah, I've had that thrown at me a few times, and I think I'm being quite warm, but it is that certain disconnect
totally
that we can sometimes have. I think it's self-preservation to a certain degree, but it's a lack of, sometimes when we're in our own mode, that lack of awareness for other people's feelings sometimes. And
and that, you know, when someone tells you they love you, like you know, my auto response is I love me too, you know, but what I'm actually saying is I love you, but I just can't, you know.
And I think that's where it shows up a lot for women in their relationships. They'll find that they have a lot of relationships that kind of fall apart. They have a lot of icks. So like you said, sometimes you need to wake
Listen,
up.
I've got a list of icks.
You know, the icks. Sometimes it can be difficult for a neurotypical person to necessarily understand. Sometimes
I've got a list of icks.
I want people to open their mouth. And I will say to people, please don't talk to me. It does come across as very rude, but actually, one more sound and you actually might send me into a meltdown. Like I'm fed up of people talking to me.
Yeah, and I'm very like that, and because of my job, my whole job is talking to people, being around people, being on the phone, being on Teams, being in meetings. And my one savior all my life has been music from a very, very, very young age.
Yeah,
I almost feel I can't breathe without listening to music. From the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed, there's always music on.
Yeah.
But what I can't do now is when I'm coming home from work, because I drive into work now. So I have about an hour and a half journey, 2 hours sometimes home. I cannot have the radio. I can't have any music on in the car.
Yeah.
I have to have my phone on silent. And if the radio is on, like slightly, I can hear it, I get tetchy, I get twitchy, and I have to turn it off because it's my brain, that noise, I am likely to have a meltdown on the M25.
Yeah, and people really struggle to understand that. I mean, I've had meltdowns in front of loved ones and they've said to me, you're acting like a toddler, and it does sometimes look a lot like a toddler behavior with a lot of profanities. But, it's very, very, very hard to control because by that point, we are usually overstimulated, and that is that whole masking and trying to fit in. So from the outside, people are not necessarily seeing what you're struggling with. But for the last like 8 or 9 minutes, Jackie, what are some of the best ways that you've managed it? Because, being 55 now and you've gotten to this point, you're very successful. you know, you have some good long-standing relationships. I mean, I love you to death. You know, how
You're only human.
you've got good taste, isn't it? But
Right back at you.
what's some of the best ways to manage it?
So it's knowing your triggers.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of soul searching and work with myself. Probably the last 3 to 4 months is recognizing what my triggers are. When am I going to get triggered?
Yeah.
Because if I can compartmentalize that, I'm okay, so I'm going to X today or A, I know there's a trigger in there.
Yeah.
I can plan for that.
Yeah.
Now, it ain't normal life to be able to always plan for your triggers.
Yeah.
But I would say to anybody, tune into what triggers, write it down. If you have a meltdown, write down what was happening prior to it,
Yeah.
because you may start to see a pattern, and that's your trigger.
Yeah.
And it's learning about yourself. It's that self-awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a coping, and it's tiring in itself sometimes knowing. But that links in with my planning. I have to be almost regimented with my daily structure.
Yeah.
Because that will compensate if I know I'm going to go where something, someone, noise, smell triggers me. I'm prepared for it.
Yeah.
I've worked it through.
Autistic traits in there, Jack.
Yeah. It's been suggested.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they
But
do go very well together, by the way.
Huh?
They go very well together.
Yeah. Well, you know, when we look at the spectrum, we can all identify ourselves on it somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think us fortunate people with our superpower, we sit quite comfortably on that spectrum. We're not right, but we're definitely on the peripherals.
Yeah. Yeah. And very high functioning, because when you're smart, because you've mentioned going to university, which is for me is when it started to unravel a little bit, the lack of structure there, ironically, because you have a lot more structure, and it fell apart for me. And studying is a big trigger for me, and having to be organized, that really sets me off. So I'm aware, for me, if I hadn't gone back to college, I probably would never have known that I had ADHD and gone to get a diagnosis. But you know, I say to people, it's not a weakness, because I've had that thrown at me. You know, you've just got to try harder. I think, you know, if you just stay in your comfort zone, it would be easy not to see these things about yourself. But I think the further you come and you climb out of your comfort zone, and the more you try to achieve that success, or, you know, fulfill your potential, sometimes that's where where you hit that ceiling and you realize that potentially you might need a bit of help.
Yeah. And to your point around reaching that ceiling, I use that analogy quite a bit. But there's something that I've definitely changed. So I'm, as you know, Lee, I'm a really private person.
Yeah.
But I've started to comfortably show a little bit of vulnerability.
Yes.
And
Vulnerability coming on this podcast today, Jackie.
huh?
It's big for you to come on this podcast today. It's showing a lot of vulnerability, and I'm so proud of you.
Absolutely. And that's for a woman like me and like you and like a lot, being vulnerable was previously always a weakness.
Yeah.
And you know, we grew up under the same circumstances, probably the same hoods. So I always had to be bossing it.
Yeah.
But actually, as a senior leader, so this is at work and probably with my friends and family, I'm quite comfortable now showing vulnerability. I'm still quite calculated about it. There's certain vulnerabilities I would never, but I'm okay to say to people, so I can't deal with that right now because I don't have the stack. I have a stacker in my brain. So if you were to cut my brain up, it has everything's stacked.
Yeah.
And if one of the stacks hasn't gone to the bottom, I can't.
Yeah.
There's nothing else going in. And I'm quite open to say to people, look, I can't deal with this today because I don't have the brain space for it. but I promise you I'll come back to you tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think that's perfect. And, showing that vulnerability, that's why I say to people, if people are brave enough to ask for help, are we validating their experiences? Because I am very similar to you, Jackie, and I was raised to be strong and not to show weakness. And, it affected my mental health. I struggled with things that I probably should have got help for a long time ago. And there are regrets around that, which is why now, I've been encouraged to open up and to, if me opening up and, you coming along and being brave enough to open up, give someone else the bravery to open up to say to someone that they need help, then I rest my case. I've done what I want to do with this podcast. So I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes. What is there anything you want to say to the people listening, and anything you want to add?
Just be true to you. Be gentle and be kind to yourself. The biggest thing is about being kind. Recognize your triggers and be open about them.
Yeah.
And look, I'm always about, if anyone wants to offload, same as you, Lee, I'll be there for you to the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
Because sometimes just talking something through, for someone to go, that's fine. Try this, try that.
Yeah. Or someone just to listen, because a lot of my friends don't necessarily understand what I'm going through. But what I was initially getting was a lot of advice. I don't need any advice. I just need someone to listen to me and validate my experience. So I will be taking you up on that offer. As someone that understands, there's a lot of explaining that I don't have to do. There's a lot of things that are just going to be understood, and that's important. But Jackie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And
bravery to come on and to speak to a lot of people. I mean, this will go out on Monday now, but you
keep being amazing.
Thank you. I don't know about amazing.
You are amazing. I don't care what any of your other fans and supporters say. I'm your number one supporter. I talk about you a lot at work, actually.
Thank you. Keep it alive, and share this, Jackie. I'm going to send you this as soon as we come off, but we've just got less than a minute to go. So I'm just going to say, guys, if you like what you've heard, subscribe, because it's really important that we grow this channel.
100%.
Yeah.
Get on there.
Yeah.
Subscribe.
Jackie, say goodbye to the Alphabet Podcast world.
Love you all.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I'm going to speak to Jackie offline, guys. The next podcast will probably have something to do with Pride Month, June being Pride Month. So I'm going to do something about that. It's all about all the intersections. So I'll catch you next time on the Alphabet Podcast.